The Wellness Show, Episode 65.
Welcome to The Wellness Show, a podcast on health and wealth. I'm your host, Tyson Bannigan, the founder of the Extraordinary Healing Arts Academy. Join me as we get the latest insight, tips, and strategies from wellness providers, coaches, and successful, heart-centered entrepreneurs, and much, much more. To the Wellness Show, and today we're talking with Dr. Jelusich. He's an author, a professor, a spiritual energy healer, international speaker, and ordained minister. With over 30 years in the field of spirituality and the study of metaphysics, Dr. Jelusich teaches healers during a training in the U.S. and Canada, and he holds numerous workshops, has a radio show, and offers private sessions. Richard, it's great to have you here on the show. We've done many exciting things together, particularly in the Mayan lands. So here we are getting to talk about the passion that you have and what you're bringing to the world. So take it away, Richard.
Well, thank you, Tyson. Thank you so much for having me on your program. I believe we met on one of those journeys to the land of the Maya. And you brought those wonderful crystal skulls with you, and we had a chance to get to know each other. And then we reconnected here recently in your neck of the woods, Salmon Arm area in BC. So it's very fortuitous that we had the opportunity to get together and do this work. I think you and I are both pretty busy and involved in the spirituality and metaphysics, helping people to empower their lives and to awaken in this golden era of inner transformation. So thank you again for having me on your program.
Yeah, so tell me a bit about the programs that you've been teaching, because you've been doing this for quite a while.
Yes, well, I've been in the field of spirituality and metaphysics for almost 30 years now, and I've been teaching people how to do spiritual healing for over 17 years now. So I have about 500 students in the U.S. and in Canada.
Well, I'm a little bit slower than you. I just graduated my first student in energy healing, and so that was pretty exciting. So I have an online course. So we do share many different things around helping bring the healers into the world and helping them be able to deliver their gifts. So you were talking about the golden era of inner transformation, or awakening. Right. To the self. So talk a bit more about what you mean by that.
Awakening to the authentic self. It means that within all of us is that absolute connection to all that is. And the problem we have is so many people are awakening so quickly spiritually that they don't exactly have all the tools to understand, implement, utilize this greater level of awareness. So the era in which you and I live right now it's 2016, is still called the 2012 era, meaning that many ancient cultures who had achieved high levels of consciousness knew where and when in space-time would be an event, where there would be a mass awakening on this planet. And so these cultures, the Maori of New Zealand, the Hopi, the Anasazi, the Tibetans, the Mayans, they all knew it would be in the 2012 time frame. It doesn't mean 2012 itself. It just means this era of time. And so people like you and I, we feel this urgency to help people to make that connection clearly, because it's a very, what is called propitious or advantageous time for us to seize this opportunity for rapid, vast spiritual growth. What's the point? As you grow spiritually, you become more aware. Awareness means beyond time and space. And you become more aware of what the teachers call your true spiritual nature, that you really are a luminous being of light beyond space and time, who simultaneously has this physical presence, this embodiment. And the awareness starts to see things as they are, not as they appear to be. Bottom line, it helps to overcome the illusion that one might be separate from all love, will, wisdom, and so forth. And so this is the authentic self in people is coming forth. And so a lot of people are asking the really crucial questions as to, well, what is this all about? And how has a religious context served me so far, and what is the difference between a religious context and a spiritual context? And spiritual simply means an intimate inner look at the self. You know, who are you and how do you relate to these higher orders of consciousness which are already embodied within? So there was a wonderful teacher by the name of Paramahansa Yogananda, and he said, one cannot be any closer to God than you already are. It's just that we must work to reveal that closeness that we already have. So this era of inner transformation requires a form of surrender, but not surrender like give in, surrender to the power that you already have. And it's a yielding. And this implies that this era of inner transformation is based in what is called the feminine principle. The feminine principle is using the power of the will to yield or to surrender or to allow to come forth that spiritual power that you already have. Not that you're going to go out and get it, but that you simply reveal something that you already have.
So this is not a very easy thing for the Western consciousness to grasp, this idea of surrendering
Right.
to divinity within or to the divine feminine or to follow one's intuition. That's a sort of counter to what we've been taught for the last 500 years.
Right. The last 500 years has been very empirical, you know, a great gathering of knowledge for knowledge's sake, perhaps even philosophy for wisdom's sake. But in spiritual teachings, you start out with information. And as you study information, it can become knowledge. And knowledge over time with experience could become wisdom. But for wisdom to become realization requires the awareness. And awareness is achieved by that yielding. And the feminine principle means yielding through your intuition. So we all have very powerful intuition. We all have chakras. Our chakras are on 24/7. They never close. Everyone's already intuitive. But like I said, there's so many people growing so rapidly that only have a kind of a vague awareness of what really is the depth of their spiritual nature. So this going from one's intellectual wisdom, 500 years of teachings and whatnot, into the realization requires us to have an awareness through an inner faith. And that's the spiritual path. That's the surrendering. And that's the inner trust. And the thing is I can't give it to you and you can't give it to me, but we can point out the benefits of holding one's self in faith, bringing the faith up even with the practical mind so that one achieves a sense of balance in life. And the faith is the heart trusting what the mind doesn't yet know, not yet. And that's why it's difficult for us, because in the West, we're very empirical and we want lots of guarantees. We want to say, well, if I'm going to evolve, I want to know what it's going to look like before I do that. And the thing is the only way to overcome an illusion is to first recognize there is one. It's an amazing catch-22, because your faith will show you things that the rational mind cannot yet perhaps understand. It's what psychologists call non-rational. It just doesn't follow rational rules, but it is the way to access a higher order of beingness or awareness.
So you're saying that there's really no 7 easy steps to enlightenment or a prescription or pill that we can take, that actually this is an inner journey of coming to terms with that our intellect will take us so far, but at some point we have to surrender to the divine feminine inside of us, which is more the intuitive aha knowing, and that the two together bring us wisdom or clarity in a way that we've never grasped before or only coming into tune with now.
Right. And it's a really good point that you bring up, because so many of us want to have that enlightenment in a weekend. You know, you go to a weekend to one of Tyson's workshops and you say, well, I went to his workshop in a weekend, I'm done.
Yeah, I'm done. But yeah, thanks. Next, line up, please. So
it's kind of like,
go ahead. I interrupted you.
No, I was just going to say it's kind of like the petals of the flower. You know, we don't tell the petals of the flower what to do, but they all seem to be able to work together anyway if they just face the sun. So the Buddhists call this nature mind. It means like what is in behind your thoughts already knows what to do, how to help you reveal that perfected self. And so facing the sun is symbolic of facing the inner Christ or the inner Buddha, or facing that inner truth through faith, the authentic self, and allowing it to come forth. The problem is in our society, we want that in a weekend. And like the people that I train is a 2.5-year course. They meet 4 weekends a year, but they practice in between because it takes time to integrate that level of awareness into your being. It just doesn't really happen overnight, but we've sort of been trained in our culture to think that if I just go to this workshop, I'm good to go.
Yeah, wouldn't that be nice? So Richard, you brought up the symbology of the flower and the opening of the flower, and which brings up the other aspect of who you are, that you use an actual flower that somebody brings you in order to do a flower reading. So in that symbology is the truth of you being able to grasp the true spirit of who somebody is and how they're showing up. So could you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, I've been doing flower readings now for 24 years, and the premise is anonymity. Maybe 12 people come to a gathering. Each one brings one flower. They put the flower on the table, and then I sit down. Point being, I have no idea who brought which flower. So I pick up a flower, close my eyes, and do a reading and healing work on whoever brought that flower, not knowing who it is. And the point is, I'm putting myself at risk because I don't know who it is. So I'm in faith. So, if I tell someone else to be in faith and I'm not myself, why would I teach it? So flower readings are how we are all intuitive. It's not just me that's intuitive reading the flower. The point is to show, and hopefully give really good information, is to show that we are all connected intuitively, and that the idea is to help the person empower themselves. So flower readings have been very popular. I've been doing them in the US, Canada, Mexico, Germany, Switzerland, Japan, ever since 1992.
Oh yeah, so that's really sounds quite exciting. I have yet to have a flower reading, so we'll put that on the agenda next time that we meet.
Sure.
So the other aspect, you've written a number of books, and one of the books that I know about has to do with chakras. So how did you get involved in the whole concept of chakras, and how does that have to do with raising consciousness and that energy healing and teaching that you're doing? How could you bring all that together for people?
Well, many years ago, I wanted to know, how is it we even come to be here on this planet? How is it we're even physically here? And so I started studying, and I started looking at different religions, including science of mind and others. And then when I started really studying spiritualism, there was all this discussion and books about the chakra system. And the chakras are said to be vortexes of energy. You have 7 lined up along the column of your spine that flow this energy called the chi into this dimension. Well, these were all very mechanical types of descriptions. So what I started doing was looking more intuitively as a direct observer. And I started noticing that each chakra affects 4 archetypes of what it is to be a human being: mental, physical, spiritual, and emotional. And then I started noticing that each chakra had its own specific psychic ability or set of psychic abilities, like heart chakra is empathy and symmetry. 3rd chakra, sorry about the noise, 3rd chakra is incisiveness. 5th chakra, telepathy. And so I started really cataloging, when people would come to me for counseling sessions, who had which chakra was more dominant than the other, kind of like being right or left-handed. Like if the throat chakra is more dominant than the rest, you might tend to see reality more through this chakra than any other. So this led to the writing of a book called The Eye of the Lotus, Psychology of the Chakras, and then to a second book called I Can Relate, How We Intuitively Choose the People in Our Lives. So the first book is more like a textbook, if you will, a reference book. The second book is more about how we relate to each other. And so I wanted people to realize that their intuitive abilities are based in the chakras, and the chakras don't just create chi like a mechanical energy, but the chakras themselves are you. They are you as a conduit to a higher you that flows the energy or the consciousness in both directions simultaneously, the higher self and the physical self, intimately connected through what is called the soul quality of the human being.
So that it says, so the chakra then, if I'm understanding you correctly, it's sort of like a lens through which you see the world and interpret it. And if that's true, then
Right.
that's the lens and through which you then create your own world to show up in the way that you want it to.
And the psychic abilities come long before the thoughts do.
Right. So it would behoove one to know then what is your dominant, gift of the 7.
Yes.
And how to use that. They're both, I would assume that they're like your divine gifts. There's both the positive and negative aspect to it. That if you get stuck in it too far, you've got consequences. And if you stay in the divinity of it, then you're going to have the divine flow coming through that lens that will help you see the world more clearly and love yourself more dearly.
Precisely what I call the higher and lower aspects of each chakra. So if you're in the higher aspect, let's say, of your 3rd chakra, you're the virtuous, authentic person who loves the truth. If you're in the lower aspect of the 3rd chakra, maybe you're comparing to yourself to each other too much, or maybe procrastinating too much, or maybe giving away your power too much to make peace. And so each chakra, actually, the mind can't do what a chakra does, because chakras are beyond time and space, and yet the mind is in time and space. So the mind capitulates and does the opposite of the chakra. So if the 3rd chakra is about power, uniqueness, and truth, and the mind says, gee whiz, I'm just not powerful, I don't have the power. So your chakra is you starts setting up lessons in your life. So you do go through the power struggles, and you do go through those events that show you that you have always had power. It was never whether you had power. So all 7 chakras are open. They never close. They're not blocked. And they're all working as consciousness to help you overcome what the egoic mind sees as the limitations. So in a way, the saints and the masters would say, God always helping you, but it's up to us to really tune in and listen and apply what that help is.
Well, I've never thought of that before. That's a brilliant way in which you described it. So the lights are always on. All 7 chakra lights are always on. There's nothing in the way of that. The only thing is then that maybe the ego and its interpretation about what that lens is doing or not doing, or what it could or should or wouldn't, and then we get caught in the human drama story and we create that reality for our own learning. So if that's what you're saying, is that what you're saying? Let me ask you that first.
Yes. Yeah, we are the conscious collaborators co-creating these realities in order for us to ascend, if you like, to that authentic self.
So if we could, the more we can be authentic and get out of our own way about shame, guilt, doubt, fear, and all those human, desires, wishes, fears that we put on ourselves, then our divinity would shine through our chakras. We wouldn't have to go anywhere or do anything other than show up. So essentially, must be getting in our own way.
We are, but another thing by way of which you brought up is that if we could just realize how we really are setting the situation synchronistically for our growth and say, this situation is really for my benefit. That's very hard for us, because sometimes you and I get into situations and we definitely don't think it's for our benefit.
No, that's
but
right.
The point being,
and we get really judgmental about it too, which is probably even worse. Right? Yeah.
Right. Well, we are all creative beings, and we are all creating this ability to emancipate ourselves from illusion. And that's one of the greatest teachings that we can give to people, is that they really do have the spiritual power to create any circumstance that will liberate them from illusion.
Yeah, that's a big one. I mean, for people to understand that they're creating their own jail, and that they have the key, and they've been the judge and the jury, and they can release themselves at any time. It's got nothing to do with anything external, although we'd love to blame something external. It must be Harry or Sam or Pete or George or somebody. Somebody did this to me. We love that human drama story. and therefore I'm wounded, I suffer, I fall upon the thorns of life, I bleed, and therefore it's not my fault. It couldn't possibly be my fault.
And the authentic self is awakening. So we go back to the beginning of our conversation is how do we help people who are asking the really significant questions? What tools do we give them to continue their awakening in this era of inner transformation? Because we know there really is a galactic alignment. We really do know that periodic alignments do induce the transformation of consciousness. And we really do know scientifically, there's over 500 scientific studies that prove human consciousness affects biological and electrical systems. So we realize more and more the interconnectedness we have to all things, which is a way of saying we are not separate from all love, will, wisdom, so forth.
So you mentioned something, a set out of words that I use as well, and that's tools of transformation. So what are these tools of transformation from your perspective?
Well, I think number one is a certain fierce sense of one's own intuition. And a lot of people say, well, what is intuition? You know, it's be like saying, well, how do you know? Well, intuition is called a qualitative state. It can't be measured, but it can be felt. And it has to do with trusting what you feel is the right thing to do. So a lot of times the intuition will say the right thing to do isn't always the logical thing to do, right? It's like I said, it's non-rational. So number one is the spiritual path relies most on how much you're willing to trust your intuition. So you might say, well, gee whiz, I don't know where to start. So one way to start is with someone who is a qualified teacher. In other words, someone who's walking their talk. I've been doing a radio program now for over 2 years, and we have guests on, like you were just on last month, who we, Deirdre, my assistant and I, my co-host, who we feel are really walking their talk. So another way is by association, is to collaborate or associate with those people that you feel are already walking their spiritual talk. It's a spiritual law called representation through relationship, where you start to psychically relate to the people you trust, like say, oh, you know, that Dalai Lama really has a profound effect on me. And so this is another way of aligning yourself or cohering yourself to those deepest, most beautiful spiritual teachings that help the continuous awakening of the authentic self. So even just those two things, faith and aligning with those people who are walking their talk, even just that is extremely empowering.
Yeah, that does sound empowering. I would think that there's a third one, though, which I'm beginning to come more to terms with, and I know you've been working with it directly and indirectly, and that is the group. You know, where three or more are gathered, there am I, the group consciousness, you know, which brings us to the whole planetary intent of why we're being asked to come together to work collectively towards conscious evolution, planetary, you know, transformation. So this collective consciousness is really almost like an evolutionary step that we are about in the midst of taking now.
Called the Maharishi effect, where two or more people are gathered, the spiritual effect is exponential. And this was in the 1970s, 7,000 people gathered at the Maharishi University in Fairfield, Iowa, and to meditate on world peace. So the next year, there was a 72% reduction in violence worldwide. So technically, it has been said that the square root of 1% is what can affect the entire population. So it means if 2 people are meditating together, it could affect 400. If 7,000 people meditate together, it could affect 4.9 billion. So in my personal opinion, this is absolutely true. And your third point is well taken, is that when people get together for fellowship spiritually, to mutually meditate on peace, inner development, contentment, that it really does work, but that the effect is amplified exponentially. Excellent, excellent third point.
You know, the interesting thing is that I've heard is that, you know, with a random generator, that there's, you know, it's a randomness everywhere. But when at these critical points that we're talking about, when consciousness comes together through and directed intent, they cease to be random. all the numbers go clear right across the board. It's something like we've truly affected the time-space continuum that we really don't understand in a profound way, because it's no longer random. We've actually interjected our human consciousness into the divine flow, and guess what? We get a result that's instantaneously. I find that exciting. So we're in a really exciting time. I know that science is something that you love, and I know you're Mr. Gadget Man. People call you Dr. J, but they might as well call you Dr. Gadget Man too. You love gadgets, you love toys. So it's exciting because the science and the spirituality are starting to have this new union. We're arriving at this understanding from two different directions simultaneously. And I know that's one of your passions. You love to be able to show that connection between the two.
Yeah. And the reason is because you and I are raised in the West, which means our basic philosophy is empirical. You know, I'm here, you're there. It's based on dualism. And so the best way to change a paradigm is from within itself. So if you use the very same Western science that's based in dualism that says, see that needle move? That means there's a chakra there or something's going on. Yeah. So it's what the Japanese call poking holes in the teacup. It's using the very same Western philosophy. So that's why I like the science, because I feel it's a way to get a wedge in there to help people go, oh, you know, maybe there's something there. Maybe it could.
So how did you come to that? I mean, if you've been interested in technology transformations for a long time, how did you get interested in the Mayan then? What was it about the Mayan? Was it the whole idea of 2012, the transformation? What was it that brought you to the Mayan?
You know, in the very early 90s, 91, I was in a bookstore and I started seeing some of these books on the Maya, and I instantly became fascinated. So I started studying, you know, the Jose Arguelles, the John Major Jenkins, the Carl Johann Kalaman, you know, all these names that have been into it in recent years. So I decided in 2005 to start taking groups to the Yucatan to study the cosmology of the Mayans. You know, the Mayan culture is the only culture that has a calendrical system based on when a certain consciousness should show up. And the longest Mayan calendar goes back 16.4 billion years. So there's a woman by the name of Barbara Hand Clow who wrote a book called The Mayan Code. And in the book, she put a chart. And on the right was when science said certain things would show up. Earth was formed, the first amoeba, the dinosaurs, Cro-Magnon, Homo sapiens. And on the left was the Mayan calendar, and they match very closely. So imagine a culture that knew where and when in space-time a certain consciousness would show up, and they are the ones who are maybe the most prolific or the most well-known for the Mayan calendar that said that a major era would come December 21st, 2012, which we are living in right now. And they were amazing astronomers with no optics. They calculated the period of Venus at 584 days, and modern science puts it at 583.92. Those darn Mayans were off by 8/100ths of a day.
That's terrible.
But they did this from a higher level of consciousness. So I got interested in the Maya because they had such an elevated awareness of consciousness.
Yeah, there was an urgency, though. Also, wasn't there around the 2012? There was a wake-up call, and you know, most people say, "Well, 2012 happened, and you know, the world didn't come to an end." And so, really, it was another false report or false flag. But in actual fact, from your point of view, it really is a landmark in conscious evolution. So, tell me a bit about that.
Well, it's like, you know, on December 31st, what happens? It becomes January 1st. So the Mayan calendar is constantly moving. You know, it is not something that is an event. It is a process. And there's a 37-year window from 1980 to 2017 when our solar system really is in alignment with the galactic center. And our solar system goes around the galaxy in a spiral about once every 200 million years ago, once around the park. But about every 5,000 years, there's this alignment to the galactic center. This one is very propitious because many of the Mayan calendars happen to align exactly on December 21st, 2012. So that's why it is called the golden era of intertransformation because it's affecting 7 billion people on this planet, whether they know it or not. And if you look around at Brexit and the candidates we have for president in the United States and some of the externalizations of the different weather patterns and all of the chaos, this is all part of the rapidity by which the changes are occurring. So changes are occurring faster, and the time between changes is also occurring much faster. And so people are saying, well, where are we? And what are we doing? Well, it's forcing us to take this inner look within ourselves without going into hysteria outside. And it's one of my sayings that I came up with years ago is one cannot temper steel in a cold fire. And so sometimes it's hot enough for us to really start focusing on what's really important spiritually rather than just the externalization of all this material stuff. So I think the Mayans had a very good grip on this understanding of the true nature of the human being. I mean, even you see in the stele, you might see a huge stele, maybe 15 feet tall, of a Mayan being, and he's standing there like this with his fingers in this way, which are called mudras, in front of his heart. Well, what is that? That's a form like a yoga posture that's emphasizing the spiritual quality of the person that manifests the physical. Physical doesn't manifest the spiritual, it's the other way around.
So do you think the Mayans actually achieved enlightenment?
I think so. I think they achieved an extremely high degree of consciousness. And people say, well, gee whiz, the Mayans disappeared around the 15th, 16th century. But if you look in the Yucatan today, there's 8 million Mayans living there. And we're constantly uncovering more and more stelae and pyramids and complexes that show the sophistication, or should I say the conscious awareness of this culture.
So these are very, very important times. We're having an evolution of consciousness that's just rapidly increasing. The gap between our thoughts and creation is getting shorter and shorter. It's time for us to wake up both individually and collectively. Certainly, the very foundations of the United States of America are being shook as we speak. We're all being asked to show up in a different way. So as we get to the end of this time together, how do people get hold of you, and what would you like to leave, the last thoughts that you'd like to leave with our listeners?
My website is lightnews.org, lightnews.org, lightnews.org. That will lead you to email and phone numbers, lightnews.org. And I suppose one of the greatest thoughts that I could leave your viewers with is that spiritual power is always within you. You've never been without it. There's no such thing. And so as you are very much like the beautiful flower that's ever unfolding, self-evolving, always creating, you cannot get away from that. It is your intent in this life's experience to reveal the truth of your nature, this authentic self. So if you truly have a foundation of love and your lens is faith, then you will continue to achieve higher levels of awareness, which will dissolve much of the illusion and the suffering that you encounter. But by doing that, you're going to also be helping the most people.
Well, thank you, Richard. It's always a pleasure to have you on the show, and we'll have you back again, I'm sure. And until then, thanks for showing up.
Thank you very much, Tyson. Many blessings.
Bye-bye for now.
Bye-bye.
For quality online wellness products, courses, and services, visit our sponsors, thewellnessstore.ca and the Extraordinary Healing Arts Academy located at thewellnessacademy.ca. To stay in touch, visit us at thewellnessshow.ca. And until next time, be healthy, wealthy, and wise.